I still remember the day that I saved that ant. That silly little insect crawling all over our driveway, and I was just watching him, wondering where he was going, what he was doing, and why he wasn't with his colony. The garage door began to lift open. It was my dad about to drive off to work. I knew that I only had precious seconds before that ant would be dead, its body squashed thin like a pancake. But I could not bear the thought of something dying, especially something so innocent and blameless as an ant. So without even stopping to question myself, I ran onto the driveway, motioning my dad to stop, reversing his car with one hand, and I picked up the ant with the other. My dad must have looked at me weird, but I honestly didn't care at the time. I had saved the ant. I had helped protect a life. Cool story, eh? No, not really. You think, and I agree with you. But just stick with me, and it will all make sense in the end. A few years later, my dad died. He worked as a teller at our local bank, and one day, some local gangsters busted in with guns, thinking that they could be bank robbers. Their plan failed, and the police quickly arrived. Some of the gangsters died in the ensuing gunfight, while those that survived were arrested and thrown into jail. However, in the gunfight, 4 innocent people died. 4 innocent people were murdered. 4 people that were nothing more than bystanders trying to survive the gunfight that was taking place around them. One of those 4 was my dad. My hero, my role model, was dead. Lying pale in a coffin, his body sewn up in several places that the bullets had riddled him, claiming his life. We all know that every person handles grief differently. In my case, I retreated into myself, afraid to care or love anything else in my life, scared that it too would be ripped away from me. And in the darkness, I brooded on my grief, dwelt upon it day in and day out. My mother, on the other hand, instead of trying to help me and comfort me out of that dark place that I was in, turned to Jerry. Jerry was an alcoholic son of a bitch. There is no other way to describe him. He was selfish, abusive, alcoholic, sex-crazed, lazy, filthy son of a fucking bitch. And he fucked up my life. I never really did figure out if she slept with Jerry to help her remind herself of him, my dad, or to help her forget him. I guess it never really mattered in the end, as most weekend nights they would still fuck each other long into the night, banging on the walls, making enough noise that I could hear them all the way from my bedroom. One following morning I went up to the yard and just sat there and watched. I watched the ants trail past me, reminding me of that day so long ago. One of the ants diverted from its trail and crawled in my direction, trying to climb onto my shoe. However, instead of picking it up to safety, like I had so many years ago, I squashed it. Pleasure flooded my whole being, tingling every fiber. I had the ultimate control over that ant, the power over life and death. I suddenly snapped out of it, realizing what I had done. I had murdered something, killed something in cold blood. How is that better than what those bank robbers had done murdering my father? It was later, on that same day, that I received my first beating from Jerry. He was lying on the couch, drunk and lazier than usual, and he told me to fetch him a beer. I told him he could go fuck himself. Rising from his drunken slur, he walked over to me and punched me straight in my gut. I doubled over in pain, winded and gasping for air. He wasn't through with me, though. No. He then gave me a powerful side cut to the nose while muttering something about me being a little shit. My mom, drawn by the noise, walked into the room, her eyes widened in horror at the sight of what was taking place. She ran over to Jerry, trying to hold back the arm that was going for another punch at me, begging him to leave me alone. "Get away from me, you bitch!" he yelled, and swung his punch to hit her, instead of me. The blow sent her flying across the room, falling face first onto the ground. Pleased with his handiwork, Jerry then walked to the fridge and got himself another beer. I never did understand why she never reported him. Maybe she was too scared to do such a thing, or maybe she actually did love him underneath it all. Either way, if I'd known back then that you could report such people, I would have never given it a second thought before doing so. Sadly, that was but first of my many beatings to follow. Some of them directed just at me, some of them both at me and my mom, and some of them only at her. I tried to protect her from him, tried to fight back. But what can a 13-year-old girl do against a man in his prime? It was then that I realized that he had the ultimate control over me, the power over life and death. A few months later, after receiving yet another beating, I ran outside into the yard, my arms and hands shaking with rage. I felt the rage that I wanted to direct at one person that I couldn't: Jerry. Grabbing a large rock from our garden, I raised it high into the air and brought it smashing down onto my outstretched hand. The pain ripped out of my mouth in a blood-curdling scream. But strangely, it felt good at the same time. Causing such pain even to myself made me feel satisfied. Relieved partially of the intense rage that tore through myself. But the feeling parted almost as soon as it came, leaving me craving more. In fact, I desperately needed more. I grabbed the rock again in my good hand and looked around to see what my options were. And then, hopping around in his cage, I saw Darcy, the black mini lop rabbit that I had for many years, that my dad had given me for my 7th birthday. Walking over to his cage, I grabbed him by the scruff of his neck and pulled him out. He looked at me with those cute, big, brown eyes, probably wondering what I was doing. Still holding on to Darcy, I walked over to the corner of the yard, which was cluttered with trees. Ducking out of view from anyone that might have been watching me from the house or the neighbors, I pinned Darcy down onto the ground with my mangled hand, and then raised the rock into the air with the other. Rage and excitement burned through me at what I was about to do. I looked at Darcy pinned helplessly before me, and I remembered. I remembered my dad and him giving Darcy to me on my 7th birthday. I remembered how much he loved me and I him. I remembered how he was my hero, how I wanted to grow up to be just like him. And then I remembered how he was killed, murdered, how he was ripped away from me without even saying goodbye. With a cry of anguish and pain that seemed to emit from somewhere deep inside me, I brought the rock down as hard as I could upon the unsuspecting bunny. Raw pleasure overwhelmed me, numbing out everything else. I could not see the blood erupting out like a glorious fountain of the dying buddy, spraying onto my glee-filled face, nor hear the cars that rushed by our house, or the gurgle of blood entering the lungs of my once prized rabbit. I just sat there, basking in what I had done, enjoying the numbing pleasure, enjoying the rage that was slowly subsiding. And then it was over. The rage, the pleasure, gone, leaving me craving more. In fact, I desperately needed more. Burying the now dead Darcy, I wiped the blood from my face with a spare tissue that I had, thankfully, in my pocket. The bloody rock still remained as evidence, though, but I already was late for school, so it would just have to wait. The rest of the week passed, by excruciatingly slow. I kept looking for opportunities to revisit that numbing pleasure, to experience that bliss just one more time. I tried squashing an ant. Nothing happened. I tracked the ant trail back to its colony and dug it all up, squashing every single thing that I could see moving. And yet, only a glimmer of pleasure was what I experienced. I needed to step it up a notch. Taking all of the cents and dollars that I had missed over the years, I went to the pet store. I ended up buying a baby kitten, and less than an hour later, the deed had been done, and I reveled in the almost nauseating pleasure that I was experiencing. And so, the rest of my high school years went by in this manner. My street became notorious for all of the missing pet posters that covered every single pole and lamp. Rabbits, cats, guinea pigs, and even recently dogs had all disappeared in the middle of the night, never to show up again. But that was not enough. The feeling of pleasure would diminish every time I repeated something that I had already done. I would barely even get a tingle of pleasure for killing a kindle of kittens, no matter how gruesomely I killed them or tortured them. I really needed to step it up a notch. Returning late one night from secretly disposing of some poor dog's body, I was confronted by Jerry at the kitchen door. Mom was working hard at her late night shift, and it was just him and me. By this time, his abusive beatings had diminished, at least to me. I think he now feared that I, now 18, and strong with youthful vigor. Nevertheless, this particular night, he had drunk himself into a stupor, and I could tell he was wanting to give me a beating. Just desiring it with every inch of his being. It's what he craved. You are not respecting me nor your mother. He paused, stretching out his hand to steady himself against the doorframe. As you should be. Look, Jerry, I just wanted a glass of milk. Then I'll go to my room. I'll be out of the room, I said as I forcibly pushed past him and into the kitchen. You son of a bitch! He slurred at me. I knew him too well not to know what was going to happen next. I ducked as he made a swing at me, his fist flying right over me and crashing into the wall. This time, though, I fought back. Putting my full momentum behind it, I swung my fist straight into his gut. This time, it was him who doubled over in pain. Winded and gasping for air, pleasure overwhelmed me like a flood that sweeps over a dry plain. As I embraced my anger, embraced the rage that I had accumulated over the years of abuse, pain, grief, and neglect. I was not finished with him, no. I had merely just begun. As he doubled over in pain, I brought my elbows crashing back into his exposed neck, sending him crashing to the floor below. He looked up at me with his eyes wide and terrified. He was suddenly scared of me, and he was right to be so. Please have mercy on an old man like myself. Mercy? I spat back in reply. Tell me, Jerry, when did you ever have mercy on me? When did you ever listen to mine or my mother's pleas for mercy, you little shit? Without giving him a chance to reply, I started to kick him as hard as I could in his ribs. I wanted to break the fucker's lungs. I knew at the time I had been giving in to my rage, into my anger, but boy, did it feel good. I hadn't felt this pleasure, the bliss, this strong ever since I killed my bunny Darcy that many years ago. I couldn't stop now. I had to step it up a notch. He lay on the ground, gasping for air, his face and his hands begging for mercy, that he could not voice. I showed him none. I grabbed the heavy cast iron frying pan that lay resting on the oven nearby, and as I swung it down onto his exposed legs, I realized that I had the ultimate control over him. The power between life and death. He screamed out in raw pain as I smashed his legs repeatedly, over and over again. I shuddered with pleasure as I finally heard the loud pop of his bones break in each leg. I walked back to the oven, gently resting the frying pan back on it, unworried about Jerry's trembling in pain on the ground behind me. He wasn't going anywhere, not with those broken legs. Yanking open one of my many kitchen drawers, I searched through it, looking for my favorite carving knife. Finally finding it, I turned back to Jerry, my hands trembling with both rage and excitement at what I was about to do. I couldn't stop now. I had to step it up a notch. Jerry's eyes darted from looking at the grin plastered over my face to the knife I held in my trembling hand. Then the realization hit him instantly. "Please," he begged, tears streaming down his face. "I beg you, don't do this. I'm sorry. You hear me?" He stretched out a shaking hand in my direction as if to push the knife away. "I'm fucking sorry." I did not pause to listen to his screams, but instead took another step into his direction. He was just a coward, a fucking coward. "You hear me? I'm sorry for all the shit that I did to you and your mom." "Keep shouting," I taunted back at him. "Show more of the fucking coward you were all along, hiding beneath a facade of strength and alcohol." He tried to reply, but his mouth failed him, and instead just shook with horror, drool trailing down the side of his mouth. Sinking down to one knee, I grabbed him by the scruff of his t-shirt and roared in his face, "Show me!" He couldn't even look at me, the fucking coward. Instead, he closed his teary eyes shut, drool still spilling out of his sputtering mouth. His body trembled as I held him, his paralyzing fear increasingly apparent by his yellow, wet stain leaking from his crotch. I raised the carving knife into the air, my whole body trembling, not from fear, but from rage that coursed through my veins. I paused there temporarily, wondering for a moment how I had gotten here, how I had come so far from that little girl that saved an ant so long ago. But I couldn't stop now. I had come too far to turn back now. I had to step it up a notch. Letting out a howl of raw pain and rage that shook me to the very soul, I brought the knife down as hard as I could, the blade sinking deep into Jerry's soft flesh. I stabbed him for every time he abused me. I stabbed him for every time he hurt my mother. I stabbed him because my dad was dead. I stabbed him because my mother had turned to him in her grief rather than me. I stabbed him because he never came close to being like my dad. I stabbed him because he had fucked up my life. I stabbed him because I could. Nothing else. I had come too far.